Hello, thank you for coming out to School Daze 3.0 When They See Us, sponsored by Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated, Omega Eta Zeta Chapter. I'm going to be your moderator tonight, Dr. Patricia Timmons, and I am so happy to have this event tonight because it's really curated off of an article that was written by a researcher at Yale School of Management. Black boys face double jeopardy at school. So before I start this forum, I would like to pay homage to our founders of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated, because without them, we will not be here today in 2024 doing amazing community service work throughout Massachusetts and beyond. Next, I would like to dedicate this to our leadership, our 26th International Grand Bacillus and CEO, Dr. Stacy N.C. Grant, followed by our regional director, our 18th Atlantic Regional Director, the Honorable Beverly S. Tatum, and lastly, our state director, Commonwealth of Massachusetts, Sharina D. Wright, Esquire. And we would like to bring honor to our chapter president, Tia Daly. She could not be with us tonight, but she would like to give everyone greetings for coming to this event. And again, I'm the moderator, Patricia Timmons. So these are some of the housekeeping rules before we get started. Please note that this webinar will be recorded. Remember the information being shared from our panelists' perspective, and you should still keep learning and growing from this topic and many more topics that we will talk about in education. Please stay on mute unless asking a question in the QA session, and please use the Q&A. We will get to your questions later on in this segment. Feel free to ask those questions in the chat. Feel free to raise your hand in the QA session, but if not, please type in the questions in the QA, and feel free to provide any feedback or thoughts in that QA as well. So relax and enjoy this conversation. So I am so pleased to introduce all of our three panelists, but I will start with Dr. Richard Booth. He has a doctorate degree in counseling and school psychology, a master of science and degree in mental health counseling. He's a clinician at Brown University and have a private practice, and he serves on the executive board of the Village Green Charter School. Next, we have Dr. Andre Morgan. He has a Doctor of Education and Leadership degree, a Doctor of Philosophy degree, a Master of Teaching degree. He leads Opportunity, Access, Equity for Beverly Public Schools, and he has more than 18 years in experience in this sector. And lastly, our panelist, Dr. Omar X. Easy. He has received his PhD in Educational Leadership and his MED in Education Administration. He is the Assistant Athletics Director for the Brand Academy by Events at Penn State, and he supports student athletes and others to manage and leverage their personal and entrepreneurial interests. So again, before we get started, this forum is going to be really led by these Black brothers and Black men on this panel, and I'm so pleased of that. And as I stated before, this is coming from an article from Yale, Black Boys Face Double Jeopardy at School. And the article discusses how Black boys in American schools faces a double jeopardy due to both racial and gender biases. The combination results in a disproportionately high rate of disciplinary actions, such as suspensions and expulsions compared to their peers. It also referred to the compounding challenges Black boys face, where their behaviors are often misinterpreted or as aggressive or destructive, leading to harsher punishment. Sadly, this can start as early as preschool. So with that, I would like to start with an opening question to all of our panelists, and I will start with Dr. Booth. Thinking about your own experiences as a Black boy and now as a Black man in your current role, what is one challenge or fear you still grapple with today when it comes to supporting Black and brown boys in education or mental health?
Thank you very much. I think that one of the things that I grapple with is the validation of outsiders of the experiences going on with these kids that they can't see internally. So the field of mental health is often looked at as a touchy feelingsy thing. It's not real. It's just you're coddling these kids and you're making excuses. And I'm very purposeful in bringing the science of mental health as a foundation so that when you're talking about what's going on with these kids, a lot of the kids, let's say inner city kids that I work with, they come from very traumatizing environments. And simple things that can cause problems are misconstrued by adults as them being difficult. Or a great example is cell phones in school. So this kid had a cell phone, and his brother was just shot and was in the hospital. His cell phone was here so that if anything happened, he got a call. He could find out what's going on with his brother. No one asked. They just seen him with the cell phone, started yelling, and he's reacting off trauma, and it got worse. I worked at a behavioral school in Boston, the worst school in Boston. And one of my kids, he had went up to get a pencil, and the teacher started berating him for not getting up without asking and everything, and he went ballistic. And he slams the door and goes out, and everyone's coming out now, and I happen to be walking in, and I told everyone, like, back up. And when he came, I just gave him a hug and brought him into my office. And I was like, I just gave him a box of tissue. Why? Because that day was the anniversary of his brother's execution and murder. And I had just started working at the school. Why did I remember that and know that date, but none of the teachers did and knew enough to leave him alone or to give him a little space or to understand that his behaviors are a matter of trauma and hurt and not a matter of wanton destruction or wanton disregard for rules. So in the situation where he was doing everything to hold himself in and just wanted a pencil to put his head down and do the work, his actions were misconstrued. So I think getting people to understand that trauma reactivity is real and we can expect it, and there are things we could tangibly do to help understand people and make their lives better.
Dr. Easy? I can repeat the question. Thinking about your own experiences as a Black boy and now as a Black man in your current role, what is one challenge or fear you still grapple with today when it comes to supporting Black and brown boys in education or in mental health?
Well, thank you. Thank you for the question, and thank you for having me. That is that's a loaded question to start this panel, but I can appreciate it. For me, I have, I would say, a very unique experience. I mean, I went to school in Jamaica, and having a different set of experience and growth there, and then going to school here in the US in Everett Public Schools, and then obviously going on to college and making my way through the educational ladder of success, so to speak, to want to become a superintendent in the public education, which I actually feel sorry for these days, based on where things are going. But one of the biggest fear I have and I grapple with all the time is my experience and how it differs from what my son at 9 years old is going through and what he's going to go through in the future. And honestly, it scares me, right? It scares me having to really grow this young man in a way where he can navigate this world that's out there, right? This world that's not so kind to us, Black men, Black women, people of color. I struggle and I grapple with that all the time. Just having to, go to school as a young first grade or elementary school and having to discuss with his dean of students or his principal what he's experiencing and how they should probably deal with something differently as opposed to how they're dealing with it right now. My child was going to a district that has a MECO program, and as simple as one morning, he got to school in his homeroom, and he was a little late, but it was probably around this time of year in his first year in that school. And the teacher said to him, my son's name is Easton. Said, Easton, are you late because the Metro bus was late getting from Boston? Now, my son obviously doesn't live in Boston because we live in the city where the school is, and he's not a Metro student. And it was just strange to me that every black kid has to be a Metro kid, right? And I thought that was just an interesting first year issue, and I think it just kind of got continually um, complicated for them because when I showed up to school, I find myself having to educate the principal as to how she needs to be dealing with black kids.
Dr. Morgan.
Going on the education path, one challenge that I grapple with is why many school-age Black males don't do well in school. There are a lot of different factors, I believe, and a lot of it stems from our thoughts on race and its intersectional identities as social constructs. That is, the way we've constructed Black boys as anti-intellectual. So think of this example. Barack Obama, when he would get praised for being articulate or intelligent, or you hear stories of a lot of other Black male intellectuals, including my colleagues on the call, who give a basic talk or a comment, and people come up afterwards and say, wow, that was really amazing. You're really articulate. And that's because people get surprised when they see an articulate Black male, because the notion is that they're in the sports or physical characteristics. And you even see it in sports. Black athletes get praised for their physicality. Whites get praised for their intellectual ability. And so that in itself causes a few issues. It lowers the bar for Black boys in terms of what we expect from them in schools. So we're not pushing Black students to do highly rigorous intellectual work because we either don't think that they can do it or they don't want to set themselves up for failure. On the behavioral side, equivalent actions by Black boys is perceived differently. So when, James, who's a white kid, runs out at recess and he hits somebody, it's okay. But as soon as, a little Black boy does the same thing, there's a problem. And so there are a number of Black boys that I've connected with who are in classrooms where they feel like they engage in the same types of behaviors as other students. But as soon as they exhibit those same behaviors, it's either looked at as challenging to the teacher or seen as oppositional or combative. And even things like dress policies. In a lot of schools, there might be a no headgear rule, for example, which, putting aside religious headgear, there are plenty of girls walking around with a scarf on their head or something, and it's not seen as an issue. But as soon as a Black boy comes into a classroom with something like a do-rag, or one of the other caps, I'm drawing a blank on what they're called, is seen as something that's going to get in the way of learning, and everybody else is learning. And so that's a question that I still grapple with. How is that so? So I think we have these ideas or concepts of Black boys that creates this this normality, if you will, that says that they're not intellectual, and we're surprised if they are. And then they become exceptional if they are.
You made a point that I want to bring back to Dr. Easy because you work with student athletes, and we were looking at, like, Dr. Morgan stated that how Black boys are seen for their physicality and white boys will be seen for their intellectual ability. How like with your current role working with student athletes, how do you manage, like, being an athlete, but also being able to still perform academically, and knowing that you need a plan B. Not everyone's going to make it to the professional league, and try to have another, another dream. Is not to say that you're diminishing, but trying to expand the other possibilities out there. Like how do you manage that?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a very difficult and slippery, I guess, slope for Black athletes in college athletics right now. And I think to Dr. Morgan's point, um, classifying Black athletes as physical or athletic, and a white counterpart athlete as being so intelligent and smart and know the game and know to play it, those subtle and sometimes not so subtle statements just continue to lower the expectations for our Black athletes. So for me, I mean, even when I was going through my doctoral studies and working with student athletes from an academic standpoint, it was always making sure that they understand that you have to fall forward in your education, right? You're coming to a research one university, you have to make sure you get everything you can possibly get out of this university, especially if they're covering the tab, right? And I think getting them to conceptually understand that aspect of it and also excel in the sports, because the sport is what got them to that point. It's a matter of taking that to the next level and taking advantage of all the resources that are presented to them. I was full aware, thanks to my mom, single mom who raised me, and education was the first thing on the table. I think most island mother, it's education first. It doesn't matter what you're doing for sport. It doesn't matter how good or fast you are. You're going to go to school and you're going to get that education, because everything else for them was secondary. And I think I'm so grateful that I was raised by such a strong woman that kind of really guided me to the point where I knew I had to graduate college. My first undergrad degree was for her, but going back and getting a master's and two masters and a PhD that was for me, because I needed. It's funny because I needed to. It's almost like I was trying to cover my athletic uh, accomplishments with my education, because the first thing someone will see is, oh, he's a football player, right? So I needed to make sure that I got all the degrees I need to get, all the knowledge and skills to excel and be able to get to the level where I could become a superintendent or now become an assistant AD.
Thank you for that. So I know through all of three of your experiences, we talked really about the schools, school setting and how to navigate, in those school settings. So I want to bring this back to Dr. Booth. From your opinion, what strategies can be implemented to encourage Black boys to express their emotions and seek mental health support?
That's a great question. I think I remember my dissertation was on would increasing the amount of Black males in the mental health system increases the usage of therapy by Black communities. And my advisor said, is that the right question? And I said, what do you mean? She said, well, maybe they're not using it for a reason. Maybe the basic tenets of the field are incongruent with their lived experiences. And as I researched it more, I started to realize, so therapy traditionally says you are the problem, you speak to someone else, and you and them sit down, and then they change you and fix you, and that fixes the problem. What happens if you come from a communal culture where your family is inextricably linked to your life? What if you come from a culture where there is marginalization, there is racism, there are external factors that are imposing themselves on you, that are changing your DNA, changing your neurological hardwiring, and the problem just isn't you? What if the person who you're talking to doesn't look like you and can't relate to anything that you're dealing with? So what I found was I would push back against that. So a great example is I remember working in a city, Dorchester, and at a clinic, and a kid said, yo, Mr. Booth, where'd you grow up? I said, Washington, Columbia. And he was like, oh, And I said, oh, I went back to school. And I said, one of the tenets of therapy that we're trained for is we don't give too much of ourselves. So the therapist answer when a kid says, where are you from, would be, so it seems like you really want to know a lot about me, but this is about you. And I would have lost them. We have a lot of practitioners who are not versed in the cultural norms of other people and other cultures. So they use this cookie cutter formula. So I was just speaking recently at a SAMHSA conference because we were talking about the need for community representative research and community representative practitioners who are able to translate that research to the people that they're servicing. So as a therapist, I would work with schools on how to engage with students on a culturally relevant level when dealing with mental health. An example is I worked at this behavioral school, and one of the teachers came in to talk to the agency, and he said, Dr. Booth was the first, I've worked here 20 years, and Dr. Booth was the first person from this agency to do this. And I didn't know what he was talking about. And he said, Dr. Booth came into my class. He said hi to me, said hi to every single kid in the classroom, stayed a while, and then took his child. See, a lot of the clinicians were white females. They were afraid of these kids. They'd come in, grab their kid, and run out. So being able to take the mental health field and translate it into ways that communities can understand by having people look like them and making it so that it's not as value laden. Again, I couch a lot of things in neuroscience so that people understand that mental health treatment is not a matter of desire, strength, worth, or will. And when you start getting people to understand that and that they could have tangible skills that will change their life, and you give them things that work immediately, you then build on other things to help later on longitudinally.
And Dr. Morgan, I wanted to ask you the same question. I know you have the education, not the clinician, but with your job, you work with a lot with the diversity, equity, access. So sometimes you have to work with sometimes clinicians and, different stakeholders for the strategies. So I would like to know from your opinion, what strategies can be implemented to encourage Black boys to express their emotions and seek mental health support?
I'm sorry. That was a tough question for me because if I can be transparent for a minute, while I'm going to share a couple of strategies, as I think about my own trajectory, I'm not at a point where I willingly express my own emotions and seek mental health support. And so that becomes the reality of how do you encourage other people to do it when you yourself are still challenged. But I think to answer the question a little more directly, from my interaction with our clinicians in our district, one of the things I believe would be inherent is that clinicians acknowledging that everyone has personal biases, and responsible practitioners must take steps to recognize and identify such biases. And so this could be done in a more specific manner than just introspection, if you will, but using specific tools. So for example, an implicit association test from Project Implicit, which assesses biases such as skin tone and race, which could be used to identify areas of concern. And once identified, individual practitioners can take steps to specifically address those concerns of bias on an ongoing basis, including follow-up assessments. I think a second strategy is culturally sensitive assessments and diagnoses. Black Americans collectively are often overdiagnosed with severe mental illness, such as schizophrenia. And they're undiagnosed for mood-related disorders like depression and anxiety. They're also less likely to be offered medications for their diagnosis, even when appropriate and covered by healthcare. Implementing an evidence-based screening and assessment tool that could follow a biopsychosocial spiritual model That is a treatment, that takes into account biological, psychological, social, and spiritual factors when assessing and treating an individual. Can certainly increase the efficacy of culturally sensitive diagnoses and treatments. And so tools that do this, for example, cultural formulation interview, Dr. Booth, if I'm calling it the right thing, from the American Psychiatric Association, can assist by focusing clinical attention on the patient's perspective and social context. I think active listening is also important to all successful treatment, but it's even more crucial when working with Black males in order to build rapport. And so treatment interventions, should validate and empower the client. They should normalize their feelings and empathize with the unique struggles that they face, really in regards to racism and discrimination. Clinicians can understand or should understand and accept the impact that these factors have on presenting problems and symptoms that have led them to care in the first place. Another strategy for practitioners is that they strongly consider implementing specific interventions that have shown to have more successful treatment outcomes, like talk therapy, narrative therapy, and talking and healing circles, just to name a few.
And thank you for your transparency of how you mentioned for your own personal self that you don't really show, or I should say speak to your emotions, so it's kind of hard. And I just want to unpack that a little, have a conversation with that. Like, how can we break the cycle of, we have Black men now who are in that space, who do not want to talk, but some of these Black men are in education or taking mentors, mentoring other young Black men or Black boys. How can we break this cycle, if we just can talk about that a little bit more? And that's a question for anyone who wants to respond.
I think you've got to be intentional around wanting to break the cycle. So breaking the cycle for me, for example, might be reaching out to Dr. Booth and saying, hey, Richard, listen, can we connect, at some point, and really being open enough to say, all right, since I know that this is something that may be needed, and something that I would advise other Black males to engage, let me model it myself. That's what we do in education. We model, get the experience, right? Sustain the experience, because it's not just a one and done. It's what are the outcomes when you really, really immerse yourself into the experience. And I think that's the first step in moving the needle, because once you can move the needle individually, then you can talk about it to somebody else around the specific needs and the outcomes that travail as a result of your own experiences. That's a part of the relationship building, which I think is at the heart of our conversation, building relationships.
I agree. I have to wholeheartedly. And I think also getting spaces where Black males could come together and work with younger males to teach them that this is okay. I had gotten a call from a colleague at a medical school, and she was like, Booth, you got to do something with our Black boys. So the first day I had all the Black boys come, and they were kind of like, what's this? And I was like, we're going to talk about mental health. And they're like, oh, we ain't got to do that. And I was like, oh, we do. And here's why. And again, really, I want the foundation people to understand when I work with them. It's not a matter of will or desire, strength, or worth. Once we could get that out the way, and people understand, I'm like, anxiety is a brain thing. That's the amygdala. That's the hippocampus. And then people start going, so it's not that I'm weak? No, it's not. Here's what you could do. And a great example is giving things away free that work. So I had all the boys in the group do a quick breathing exercise. And after, we just talked about how did that feel? And everyone was like, yo, it felt good. I was like, how long was that? They're like 2 minutes. I was like, that was your brain resetting. This is what you can do, and it's tangible. And also, I think pointing out the communal aspect of it, where you say, help each other. If you see someone floundering, don't just, I don't want to say nothing because I don't want to look like I'm something. Ask someone how they're doing. Ask them if they're okay, and give permission to actually be in these spaces and to do it. It starts with these things where we're making purposeful efforts to destigmatize and demystify mental health and make it not something outside of yourself, but inextricably linked to you and your actual well-being.
Dr. Easy, did you have something to add or?
No, I couldn't say any better. I think just really normalizing that, we can talk and express ourselves and talk through things that are challenging for us. I mean, I think culturally, as Black people, Black men, it's been frowned upon to have this, which I believe, the confidence to speak about something that's challenging for you. So I think as we move through and educate our young people that we influence each day, is really trying to make sure they understand it's okay. It's okay to have a conversation with a trained adult, to speak about things that may be bothering you, because that's always a stepping stone to overcome some of the challenges that we face on a day-to-day basis, for sure.
So I heard throughout from the time that we have spoken is just the navigation, but some of just the incidents that occur, whether it was yourself or your son or another child that that you worked with. And so I want to ask, how can educators or people who are in mental, not the mental health, but mentoring, in the mentoring aspect, can be better trained to recognize and address the unique challenges faced by Black boys, especially when they are not culturally the same? And anyone can, I'll leave that open to anyone to come on.
So I take a first stab at this. So as you mentioned in that question, the key words that you mentioned are Black boys, right? And the big problem that we have in secondary education or even higher ed is that we don't have enough Black men in the system to really be a role model or a North Star for Black boys, right? But I think it's a deep-rooted systemic problem, right? Because historically, Black boys don't have good experiences in high school. So it's very difficult for them to come back into education and be an educator, because no one wants to go back into a system that hasn't provided them with a happy and feel-good moment or experience. And I think when I was a superintendent in the Metco district, trying to recreate the culture to provide a safe and equitable environment for all of our students, but particularly our Black children, so they can come back into education. But when they leave and they have nothing but like regrets about the journey and the time in these suburban white schools, they don't go back. They're scarred and they run so far away from it. So I think it's really looking into how we can provide that environment that breeds safety, health, and joy for Black boys and Black women, just to come back into the field and help continue to build on our younger people.
Anyone else want to jump in on that question, or?
I think training is important. I've worked with a lot of schools and districts and teachers, and I do a series. And I talk to people about the need for long-term training on similar topics that could be reinforced. So if people are working with Black boys, I remember talking with educators and about the experiences of students of color. And after I did the programming with the boys, and I did a training for the teachers based on that research. And I did, I forgot what it's, a word cloud, a sound, and all the words that I saw describing these young boys. And it was like leader, incredible, sensitive, entrepreneur. And they were like, what? And we did this exercise where I had two teachers talk to one teacher as a student. And they were displeased with his work and they were going to show it without saying. And all the teachers watched. And as the teacher spoke condescendingly to the student, all the teachers around, and they're all teachers, but they're acting. And they're like, ooh, ooh. And I was like, did you feel that? And people are like, yeah. I was like, did she explicitly say anything rude? And they're like, no, but her tone. Like when she said, you don't have to do all your work, but I really think that you can try. And being able to see this as a well-intentioned person talking condescending to another person pretending to be a student, everyone could feel that. And when people are able to feel what the experience for that child is like, it now becomes more than just cognitive, I think it. And then when you start talking about, oh my gosh, when you brought up implicit bias and people and our understanding of other people and the assumptions we make, and you talk about descriptions of people, and then you remember the old joke about the car accident, and then the person says, oh, I can't do the surgery, that's my child. And everyone's like, who is that? It ended up being the doctor was the mother, but no one connected mother and doctor because of the biases that we had. And when you teach people that these are real people, Black boys feel, and the way you interact with them are based on presuppositions about them, and you run through exercises and you talk about cognitive and you talk about bias, and you give people tangible tools and skills for what to do in those situations, what to say, and they role play them. And it's over a long period of time, people then start developing a sense of one theoretical understanding or how to behave in these situations, but also words to say and what not to say, and how their understanding and implications impact our boys.
Dr. Morgan, you want to add, or you're still on mute?
All right. A brief add, I think regarding the training of mentors, what's important to keep in mind is that mentors need mentors themselves. And so, and many mentors have an interest in being mentored, because as you're developing a capacity to support somebody who hasn't necessarily gone through the same scope of experiences, you still need somebody in your corner to be able to help you to navigate through certain experiences that you're dealing with as you're coaching and mentoring someone younger. So that's something important to keep in mind as well. And that will also add to the retention from mentors as well. If they're getting what they need, then they'll make sure that others will get what they need.
Awesome. In your opinion, of what you have seen or your experiences, what are some successful programs that you've seen specifically address the needs of Black and Brown boys and K through 12 education? And this is really stemming from, say, for those who are in single parent households and it's just a mom and they're trying to figure out where to put their son. Their son may not be an athlete, may be an athlete. But what would be some of the resources that you can see or you can think of now to really start a mentoring path for those kids?
I think I heard in there successful programs or strategies. So I'm going to go to the strategy route. And one that I'm thinking of off the top of my head, pronounce the names of students correctly for Black males and Black females. Names are part of one's story, their cultural heritage, their family history. So honor the identity of students by genuinely making an effort to pronounce their names. I think a second strategy is to get to know the Black students in your class, particularly the Black males. Black children are not a monolith. And though knowing students as individuals, educators can celebrate what they bring to the classroom. I think it's also key in that to be careful not to call students by the names of other Black students in the class. And so, many students as young as first grade, and this is specifically males too, speak to the experience of being called the name of another Black male in the class. And not only is this harmful, but it's traumatic. I think a third strategy is to present Black history and culture in ways that are affirming, not from a deficit model. So when you speak about the Black experience, I don't recommend starting those conversations from a place of struggle or pain. Black students need to see images and stories of Black joy, and this is particularly so for young Black males, Black and brown males. You know, the world is heavy enough, and so their experiences in school should be where they are affirmed and celebrated, from the stories they read to the images that are placed in the classroom. And then perhaps a fourth strategy is to present diversity within the Black and brown aesthetic. You know, often when Blackness or brownness is shown, it prioritizes whiteness, and students who are darker in skin color are on a periphery. So just a few things for us to think about.
Those are really good, especially to pronounce Black names. Like that's a really good one. Dr. Booth or Dr. Easy?
I think of the word relationships. I think that as a strategy, forming strong relationships. I've talked about this study a lot because it was profound. It was this Harvard study that's been going on for the past 85 years. And it's the longest longitudinal study of its kind. And they were just looking at what are the key components for health and wellness and well-being of humans. And when they got the results, they couldn't believe it. They were like, let's look at social status. Nope. Let's look at how much people made. Nope. Let's look at the jobs people had. Nope. The number one thing that was correlated with happiness and well-being was strong, positive relationships. So how are Black students, Black males, being put in positions where people care and actually have positive relationships? I've been a part of some programs at this school in Rhode Island. And this guy, we were on the same board of a charter school. And he was like, you got to come to my school. And I came to the school, and it was in room 208. This school, when they did the study in Rhode Island of students' positive relationships with their school, this school scored the highest. And this one man who cared would talk to every single student. When students came in, he'd be like, how are you doing? He greeted them every day. He would talk about how good they are, what they need to be. He was like, this place is going to be safe. He was also involved in like street work. So he was like, there's no gangs in the school. He would walk up to known gang members and be like, call your OG and tell them I want to talk to him. They'll pick up the phone, call the OG, and the OG will talk to him, and he'd be like, tell your boy that there's no gangs from the hours of this and this. And the OG be like, you heard what he said. He had such strong relationships. When kids had problems, they come to room 208. And he brought me in as the mental health person. And we started working with the kids. And there was a kid that came to the school, and he was from Africa, and he had a scar on his face. He was dark skinned. So when we talk about complexion, and he had a reputation of a shooter. And he had an ankle bracelet. So before he got there, they were already buzzed and fear about him. And we walked up to him. We said, what's up? He's like, what up? I was like, no, brother, we come in peace. Come. And we talked to him about our expectations for him and his support systems. We're like, this is the person that you come for this. This is the person you come for this. This is the person you come for this. And we built a circle around it. And we did this with a lot of kids. And I found that in other schools, when people did this, where they had strong relationships, people coming together and meeting the needs of the students, especially in real time, they were actually able to get support for the Black males because they would come with different stories. And by having people flexible enough to care, but yet have a wide range of interests and skills, they were able to touch on different things. So if a kid was interested in art and there was someone there who was an artist, they could converse. And now, hey, here's how you manage this. Another child was this, and they got individualized treatment that met them where they were at. But it started with strong relationships and people caring and carving out spaces where they could go and be and feel safe enough to do that.
Awesome. And Dr. Easy, you okay?
Yeah, I think that so much was just said. I think, all the things that Dr. Morgan and Dr. Booth just mentioned, but I do think a key component in all of this too is raise the expectation of our Black boys in school, right? I think if we could just really like lean in to that piece of it where you don't just put a Black boy in the lowest level of a math class because he's a Black kid, right? I mean, I've lived some of these experiences as superintendent that I tell you make my skin crawl to see educators treating their Black students the way they treat them from a deficit education standpoint and low expectations, right? I mean, as simple as a Black kid getting the same placement score as an Asian kid, and the Asian kid goes to the highest level of math, and the Black kid goes to the lowest level of math because why? Because his uncle got shot in Boston a month before. No, it doesn't shouldn't really matter. His scores reflect that he should be in the highest level class, but it's just the inherent of low expectation for Black students and the Black boys. I think that's one thing I would throw out there and try to figure out how we could change that.
And do you feel like those changes, we have to now start to see, you mentioned before about it's not that many Black men in the system. So do you feel like teachers coming in can change that, or you're thinking that we need to recruit and get people to be in those superintendent and commissioner type roles?
Right, 100%. So, I mean, I was obviously a Black superintendent in a wealthy white district with a medical program, and so many times I'm in the room and I'm the only Black person in the room. I mean, nights after night, sitting at school committee meeting and looking out to the masses, I'm the only Black person in that room, but I'm the superintendent, right? So that's a heavy burden to carry, a heavy cross to carry, right? And we have to just be realistic, right? There's no way we are going to be able to recruit, educate, and populate our schools with Black and brown teachers, male or female, like this. We have to be cognizant and be intentional around educating our white educators to break down some of the unconscious biases that exist, right? And the deficit teaching, because at the end of the day, there are always going to be more white teachers in education than Black teachers, because again, the experiences that Black students, Black boys experience in high school is not positive. And they're not going back to that if it's not positive. So we slowly have to kind of recreate their experiences in school to get them to come back. But in the meantime, we have to reach in to educate those who are now educating and interfacing with our kids.
Dr. Morgan, did you want to add into that question about the
Yeah,
recruitment?
and I think strategy is important, and I know that Dr. Easy can attest to this. Dr. Easy has been where I think my next seat is going to be, and one of the things I'm constantly thinking about personally, because similarly, I too am usually I'm the only one in the room at the table, to be more explicit, and I know that every decision has to be strategic, because the one misstep will throw me away from the table, and then I lose the impact, if you will, for the Black males and females and other students of color that I really want to help. And so, I think you've got to toe the line is probably the answer, because while your goal is to support the students with the greatest needs, and often those students are the ones that look like you, how do you make the decision in a way that doesn't compromise the work for the students that you desire to help, but also keep you at the table at the same time, so that you can continue to make one decision after another, that ultimately will change the perspective and the dichotomy, if you will.
Yeah, spot on, Dr. Morgan. You're 100% correct. I think, having a seat at the table. Someone said if you're not at the table, you are on the table as the menu, right? So it's really trying to navigate that space and figuring out how do you get to the end goal. I mean, my motto was every child, every day, because it's not just lifting up the Black students, because if you lift up every children in the school system, our Black kids are coming with that, right? And trying to get folks to
Mhm.
to embrace that. Every child, every day is something that I think I live by, because we're not just focusing on those who are furthest away from the opportunity gap. We're looking at all of our students with the intention, knowing that our Black students are the furthest away, right? So
And Dr. Booth, for the the clinician piece to it, how do you feel is that not just the training, but I would just say for school systems, I know some school systems have guidance counselors, some schools have social workers. Like how does that support? Because even though we talk about the recruitment, we still need that support there. And how can we get, because I noticed there's not that many Black male clinicians as well. How can that piece, come forward as well, in your opinion?
It's a hard endeavor. Like when Dr. Easy was talking about, the people don't go to the school jobs because bad experiences. A lot of our kids have had bad experiences with therapy. And also people, one, don't know what therapists are. And realistically, to be successful, let's say monetarily as a therapist, you have to be forward thinking if and highly educated. So if I'm gonna spend 4 to 10 years of schooling, why don't I just be an MD? Why don't I get into business? Why don't I do all these other things that will bring immediate monetary gain and is not in a profession that is dubbed feminine? So when we're trying to recruit and retain, we have to be purposeful in finding people who have aptitude and mentoring them and teaching them the way. I had a mentor and he was a doctor and he's like, what are your plans? And I was like, this. He was like, then here's how you do it. He's like, I own my own clinic. And he's like, this is how you can help yourself and help your community. And he literally put me under his wing. I knew other clinicians. He put me on his wing. So now when I see younger clinicians, I'm like, hey, this is how you do it. This is how you get licensed. This is how you make it profitable. This is how you also help our people. Because it is a slippery slope, right? When you're in these spaces where you're the only one. So I would go into schools or I'd be in places. I'm the only Black therapist. I think it was 3% of all psychologists are Black males. So when I'm in these spaces and I'm the only one, and then there's a Black child that is having difficulty, I have to be very, 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 very careful, because if something is wrong, it looks bad for all future Black clinicians and all Black kids. So creating spaces where we're accepted and our expertise is accepted and that we can branch out to other people who are coming up and give them support, and teaching these institutions to not treat us all as a monolith and lump everything in together so that people could get individualized treatments. It's a very hard thing to do because, again, if you're going to become a therapist, it's a long road that other roads are shorter and theoretically more easily financially lucrative.
All of you had great answers, and I'm gonna really ask this because as I was listening to each one of you, I'm like, I'm looking at the burnout, right? I'm looking at, because each of you stated that I was like the only Black male at the table. I have to be very strategic on when I'm sitting at this table before it tilts, or I'm actually in the part, the menu, or you're the only Black therapist. How do you manage to bring in self-care while you're doing this day by day of trying to build programs, trying to mentor, trying to, go into policies, trying to be the representation almost, because when you're at that seat at the table, you don't want to be, but you're kind of you're in that realm of where you're the representation. How do you do all this and practice self-care so you won't have that burnout?
I think for me, it's intentional. I had to get to a place where I changed my mindset, and this is going to sound selfish, but this is part of my self-care regimen. I come first, because if I don't put me first and take care of me, then I can't take care of anybody or anything else. And so that becomes inherent. And part of that structure is I also set some baselines. And so Dr. Easy, I know I'm going to get hit on this, and have been, but I don't do 8 o'clock meetings anymore. Like, my day doesn't start until 9 o'clock, because at 8 o'clock I'm still getting my head right. And I'm getting my head right for the things that are going to come my way during the course of that day and evening, and the things that I've got to respond to. And if I'm not in the right headspace to be able to deal with it, then I've lost my seat at the table, potentially. And so, that time that I probably should be sitting in my office, I'm in the gym, um, because that helps to fuel my spirit. And not that I really enjoy it, but it helps my energy levels, it helps my mindset, it helps my attitude. But before I hit the gym, I'm in prayer. And so prayer is my first order of the day, because I don't meet with anybody without meeting with God first. And then I work on my body and my mind together. And then we go tackle the day.
Right. Now, Dr. Morgan, you're spot on. I tell you, you got to get your mind right, and getting your mind right first is having your moment with God and talking through your plans for the day. But you're absolutely correct. It's you know, it's hard, and it's a struggle. And I'm going to try and see if I can articulate this appropriately here. But for example, when you look at a public school structure, and speaking from experience, you have multiple principals in the structure, multiple assistant principals, multiple directors. You have multiple assistant superintendents, but you only have one superintendent, right? So you have yourself. You are the only person in that chair, in that position, that may experience what's going on in that district. I used to tell my admin assistant, who was amazing, and I love her to death, that yes, you start my meetings at 9 o'clock, but at 7:30 or 7:45, I'm in the schools where I can see the young babies coming in, because it brings a different level of joy, and just reaffirm your purpose as to why you're doing this. Because if you can't really reconnect there, then it's not going to work, right? It's like being in public education really is not a job, it's a calling. It's something that you really have to believe that you're changing lives of these young people. And when I go and I sit in a music class and listen to them play instrument from 8 o'clock to 8:30, and then go to another math class and interact with them, it gives you reaffirm your purpose. I think that's somehow I got through those days. Is really seeing them in their elements.
And I think self-care is beautiful. I do. It's my favorite. I do trainings. It's my favorite training to do with institutions, with schools, everything. Self-care is my favorite training, because you say to people, here is permission to take care of yourself, because you take care of other people. A lot of times when people take care of other people, they do it at the expense of themselves. When I was at home and someone might call, yo, doc, can I have a few moments? I was gonna do something, but sure. So one of the first things I tell people is it's proactive and preemptive. Self-care isn't just waiting till something is wrong. It's things you can do before they get there. I love building tangible skills. Like, one thing I tell everyone right now, I'm gonna make some assumptions. I assume that you brush your teeth twice a day. I assume that you brush your teeth for approximately 2 minutes, and more than likely it's in front of a mirror. So when those 2 minutes start and you wake up and you're brushing your teeth, for those 2 minutes, I need you to tell yourself positive things about yourself. I need you to tell you things that you're proud of, that you like about you, that you can tangibly do repeatedly to reinforce to yourself that you're okay and good. You're the first voice you hear when you do this. And when you go to sleep and brush your teeth, do it again, and you'll be the last. And it's funny because I'll come back to trainings later on, and I'm like, by the way, how many people did their affirmations this morning? And no one will raise their hand. And one person might raise their hand. They go, I had a feeling you'll ask, so I did it this morning. So I'm like, you'll do it in this morning to not get in trouble with me, but not to help yourself. So giving people permission, but also tangible skills of what to do. There are 8 domains of wellness. And if you can conceptualize these 8 domains, it's the physical, the spiritual, the social, the emotional, the financial, the intellectual, the occupational, and the environmental. And when you start seeing where am I in these spaces, for instance, environmental, being in green spaces actually decreases stress hormones in your body. So are you in spaces where there are plants to decrease your stress hormones? Exercise has been shown to be almost as effective as medication at elevating mood. So are you exercising? So when Dr. Morgan talks about he wakes up and he exercises, are you doing that? When Dr. Easy and Dr. Morgan talked about conversation with God, that is your spiritual self-care. Are you doing things in these domains, and are you purposeful? It's not accidental. You're prioritizing yourself, and you're doing things that you enjoy, and also you're engaging other people sometimes into it so that you can build your social connections and realize it's not just you. Thank you.
Dr. Booth, I have to say, I saw the joy on your face as you were talking about taking care of yourself as your favorite training. It's funny because, not to add humor to this, because you're
Yes,
right on,
humor is
and it's fun.
necessary.
It's necessary. And one of my favorite movies is For Christmas with Vince Vaughn and Reese Witherspoon. I love this movie, right? It brings this joy to me to watch this movie. But there was there was a scene where I think Vince Vaughn was having a conversation with Reese, and he was saying she was arguing with him about him not taking care of her or doing something for her. And in the humor, he said, honey, even on the airplane, they said, put your mask on first before you help others. Because if you don't have your mask on, you can't help anyone. I thought that was funny, but it's the truth, right? Taking care of yourself
Yeah,
because you can't help anyone else.
we have to. We have to. I use the analogy of we're all cups of giving. And if we keep giving and we never replenish the cup, we're going to be empty.
Mhm.
You know?
Now, how can we those are like all great, but how can those practices be towards Black boys so early, right? Because sometimes people are late in the game of self-care. We're almost self-care after a major incident in our lives. How can that practice come earlier? So we can, so young Black boys can have that mindfulness and, learn how to settle down and learn to have self-worth with that self-care.
We actually have to talk to them early.
Yeah.
We have to start having these conversations collectively and individually early. It's not wait till a kid is 30 and is now, an adult and I don't need this. Let's start talking to the younger kids in the younger grades. Like my daughter, she's 4. She does breathing exercises, So she'll sit there and she's upset. And I'll be like, Shari, remember to breathe. And she'll go, okay, daddy. And she'll slowly breathe. My son, the same. I work with kids in schools and things, and it's everyone. Here's how you breathe. And first thing I go, and when Dr. Easy talked about humor, first thing I do, especially my young Black boys, I go grab your tummy. It's an interesting thing to watch these people who have sort of this view of what a man is supposed to be, super tough and strong all the time. And I say, grab your tummy. And they're kind of like, what? I'm like, grab your tummy and let's breathe. And then you do a breathing exercise right there. And they go, oh my gosh, this works. And I was like, right? And grabbing your tummy helps. So when we introduce this as normal, so it's not something you do because you're defective or because you're the bad kid, but here is something that we do every day. This is something that we do. because we want to value ourselves and take care of ourselves, we take it away from the deficit model of you're doing this when you're mad or you're wrong, but it's let's do this to promote our health and well-being and with each other. And I've had kids where some kids mad, they're about to get in a fight, another kid might tap them and be like, yo, take that breath. And they're little kids, and you'll see two kids with their hands on their tummy, and now they're breathing, and each one teach one. And if we believe that they could do it and has buy-in from everyone, we could spread it, but get to them early and not just wait till it's the right time or they're the perfect age.
Right. 100%. I agree. Get to them early. It's getting to them early, meeting them where they are, finding them where they are, and addressing these issues and creating that sense of comfort and a sense of belonging, relatability earlier on. Let's not wait for something to happen. And I think, to your question, is trying to figure out where and how do we get to go to Boston Public Schools, where most of the black young men are, right? Go to the suburbs where the MECA program send young students out there to those schools. You have to be able to bring people that they can relate to early and let them see themselves in these individuals. I mean, this panel, like this panel of, I don't remember in a long time sitting on a panel with this many PhDs across the board sitting on and all the same. And I'm sure many of our young black men and girls, women, don't really see that often. And I think we have to be able to figure out how do we get them to see these things more often so it becomes normal for them, right? To see, oh yeah, well, I want to be a doctor. I want to, like they don't see themselves in the things that are up there, elevating. And I think it's trying to figure out how do we get to them early and often. That's really the challenge, right?
Definitely. So I'm going to go right into, because we have upcoming elections. And so I want to go into, in your opinion, what role should policymakers play in addressing the educational disparities faced by Black and brown boys? I know that's a loaded question. I know we have question number 2 here in Massachusetts. There's a lot of things going on.
Yeah, I I struggle with a lot of that piece, that whole policy and role in politics and where they fit in. And I think candidly, so we see ourselves in Mass as the beacon of public education. And I think we are going about this the wrong way. I think we have to take a deeper look at the role that school committees play in secondary education. Very often, members of a school committee supervise the highest education level individual, which is the superintendent in the school system. And none of the 5, 7, 11, or 15 individual probably ever gone beyond a high school degree. And not to say that they can't have input, but they run to be on these committees on their personal gains and what they think is their personal, vision around what they want for their child or their neighbor's kid. When policies are put in place in secondary education, school committees make these policies, right? And I dig back into my experiences as a superintendent. And when I presented my district improvement plan to my members of my school committee, and in that policy, in that plan was, we are going to address math of Black and brown students in the first year of my rollout. And when the white member of the school committee turned to me and said, well, Dr. Rees, you can't do that. You can't put that in there. And I said, well, why not? So because people in our community are going to actually think and believe you're going to do that. And I'm like, but that's the point. But funny enough, this was a continuation of the district improvement plan from the previous superintendent, who was a white male, and there was never an issue with that being in that plan. But as soon as Dr. Easy, the black superintendent, intentionally said, we're going to continue this. Oh, no, you can't do that. People are going to actually think you're going to actually get this done for black kids. And these are the issues. And if these school committees sit and try to drive and control policies, where do we go? How do we get it done? I mean, as simple as Brown versus education was established, it was 10 years before they actually take seed. They passed it, but 10 years later was when it was actually growing into saying, oh, well, maybe. So if it took that long for something at that high level to take effect, then how do we actually infuse change for all of our students and those who are furthest away from the opportunity gap? It's a challenge. And it starts with the policymakers and who implement those policies.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think one of the things to keep in mind is that we're fighting against a system that's not meant to be broken. And so the question then becomes, how do you dent the system initially and then collectively work with partners to do enough dents that will ultimately break the system? I think to the question, to kind of stick with the topic, policymakers, whoever they are, really need to pay particular attention to the intersection of institutionalized racism and sexism in society. And they have to be intentional with their support for Black boys and men. And so anything less than systemic change will allow the current system to continue to function the way it was originally designed. And that's to the detriment of Black youths. So to that end, I think there are three things or key policy areas that systematically address the challenge that Black and brown boys and men face. One is criminal justice reform. And so to truly address the social issues and problems that affect Black and brown boys and men, there has to be significant reform to the criminal justice system. Two, I think improving the education system. So Black and brown boys have fewer opportunities to receive higher education because by the time they get to that point, many have a felony record, which gives limited access to federal student loans. And then three, improving employment rates and opportunities. And so on average, Black men experience higher unemployment rates, low labor force participation rates, and lower earnings than their white male counterparts. And so these trends are not only indicative of lower economic power, but I think it's lower access to quality healthcare and fewer social connections overall. And so those are just three focus areas. That's not the collective core of it, but that's where we can start.
Dr. Booth, did you have something to add or?
Yeah, I agree with these sentiments. And I think that when we think of legislators, I think there needs to be more education collectively for citizens about the roles of legislation and how it works. Like community organization, getting community representative, community identified needs, and then making changes. Yeah. I remember a mentor of mine, and he was talking, he was like, you should, if you're trying to do something, donate to a campaign. And we're like, really? He was like, yeah, donate like $200 to a campaign and see how far it gets you. And in my mind, when I heard this, and I was younger, I was like, oh, $200 could do anything. But then you start seeing if someone donates to a campaign, they're saying something. They become valuable, and the group that they represent become valuable. So if we can start seeing the power of legislation, but getting the people that will get the needs of communities that are oppressed and marginalized actually met and not just lip service. In my dissertation, we were talking about the need for increasing the amount of clinicians of color, Black clinicians, Black male clinicians. One of the clinicians was like, remember, Booth, we have more Black clinicians now than we ever did, and things haven't really changed because the system hasn't changed, but also all skin folk ain't kinfolk. So when we're thinking of legislation, it's really action that is more than lip service that will actually make change and will actually make that dent. Because sometimes people will push for certain things that look good, that will get watered down. But when someone like Dr. Easy comes and says, I want to actually enact this now, people are like, whoa, wait a minute. That might actually get done. And when you have a system, you know, someone always jokes around, says the system is broken. I'm like, it's not. It was really designed to have what's happening right now. And when we're getting together, education, educating people on the roles and what can be done, and then actually having people do it. I was at a forum and this politician, he came in and he said, you know what's interesting? When the elderly community wants something done, they come to my office and they sit down and they wait for me to talk to me. And after a while of talking to people, they get what they need because they're going to show up to talk to me, to hound me about it, and to vote. And if something's not done, they'll vote someone else out, and then they will come and remind me about it. We have to learn this power. Does anyone remember when the Green Party was coming into play for the Republicans? And they came en masse, started bum rushing community forums, and they started talking about their needs, and they got politicians, and they got their needs met to the point where they held government at standstill, even though they were a small minority. We have to start looking at the tactics that were successful and then emulate them. And I think educate and put into practice things that will actually get changed and being realistic about what can happen and not pie in the sky, but what are realistic dents, as Dr. Morgan was saying, to then make larger change.
Awesome. I'm actually going to turn it because I actually seen the Q&A and some people actually have comments. So I want to engage with the audience as well. I'm going to bring my sorority sister, Kendria, and she's going to just talk about some of the comments and the questions for you.
Hello and good evening. So we do have some questions and a comment in the chat. I'm actually going to start with the comment first, which was around that area of self-care. And the comment is, always put on your oxygen mask before you help others. So that was a connection that one of our attendees made. First question. Let's say in a perfect world, we are able to make those systematic changes in the school departments. How do we then get reinforcements and buy-in from home? How do we incorporate a traumatic home life to being successful in school? Anyone would like to take that? Or
Well, I'll go. I work with schools and I do a training series where I work with the leaders, educators, and students and caregivers. And one of the first trainings I did for parents was called The Benefits of Caregivers to Their Child's Education. And we had a room of parents, and I said, what I'm going to say is evidence-based. And research and evidence shows that parental involvement in a child's education is so robust that it could mitigate ethnicity, poverty level, and the parent's own educational level. And, you know, a lot of studies that talked about a parent's education level at a child's certain age is kind of, if they haven't reached past that, that is the cap of the child's education. But parental involvement can actually mitigate that. And it was so interesting because parents were like, really? I didn't know I was that important. And when you started asking questions and having open communication, you had parents, you found out there was cultural differences that people didn't account for. There were some cultures that I didn't know that I was supposed to be involved in my child's education. When I go to my dentist, I don't help them clean my teeth. So I didn't know that I was supposed to be instrumental in helping my child with their education. I thought I brought them there, the teachers taught them, and that was it. So by giving parents the tools, and I literally did a training exercise where I said, you know, you can help your child. Like, are you eating dinner with them every night? Are you in a space where you then ask, how's your day doing? And you talk about their day, you find out what their homework is, you find out what their needs are, where their strengths are. And then if they have a problem, do you go over their homework? Do you help them? And some parents are like, I don't know this new math. I mean, it's different than when I did. I said, beautiful. And I put up on the board Google. And I said, this is your friend. And I gave them a math problem. And I was like, does anyone in here raise your hand if you know how to do this problem? No one raised their hand. And I said, do you notice my hand is down as well? I was like, this is a problem that my third grade son gets, but he takes Russian math. It's a extra math enrichment for him. And I said, I don't know how to do this problem. So I put this problem into Google. Google told you the formula. It explained how you did it. And then we all did it together. And I said, now you can go to your child. You don't have to be perfect. You have to be present. They don't expect you to know everything. But if you can help them and teach them the growth mindset that just because you don't know something now, it doesn't mean that with help you can't get it later. And you build with them and you talk to them and you create these positive moments with education. You help support their educational attainment by teaching them that the system isn't against them and that you'll be there to support them no matter what. And you start doing these things. You start helping parents understand mental health. You start teaching them lifespan development. So you start teaching them what is your child capable of doing at certain points in their lives, because some parents grossly overestimate what their child is supposed to be doing or is capable of doing. So when you teach them realistic skills, and when you're talking about trauma, and you start to let people know that trauma is a neurobiological reaction and that they're not defective, and then you teach them skills and you build in supports, and then you give the kids supports. And by the way, this can all happen in the school. And the school can get connected to community resources that can then connect to the parents, and you have a great ecosystem that is able to hold parents and students and educators and the community and blend them together to have people actually succeeding. But it takes purpose, a desire to actually see the brown and black kids do better, and the willingness to have some tough conversations and tough times, and to get the people involved that will know what to do, that's representative of the community, from the community, with practitioners from the communities that we're servicing.
Thank you for that response, Dr. Booth. Does anyone else want to add to that question?
I mean, 100% correct. I did my master's thesis on the impact of parental involvement, and 100% proven. But I think having to educate our Black and brown parents, the importance of them being present for their children in the school system, they have to be present. And of course, we understand that sometimes it's very difficult to be present, right? Because they work certain hours, they're not really conducive to being on call to go to school like some of our more affluent families. But I remember when my very first meeting with the Metco family, when I took the job at superintendent in the Metco district, I sit there and I said to them, listen, I believe every single one of your child could succeed and go on to get the highest level of degree in college that they want to get, wherever they want to do, how they want to do it. And I said to them, if you're not committed to being a part of this process, do not send your kid out to this district. I don't want your kid out here, because if you're not going to be a part of it, it's not going to help, because we can't do it. So if you're there ready to get down with this, let's go. We can make this happen, right? And to your point, Dr. Booth, they don't have to know how to do the math problems. Sometimes just sitting at the table with their child and actually have him struggle progressive, right? Positive struggle through that problem is sometimes all it takes.
Thank you very much for that response, Dr. Easy. We will shift to our second question. What are your suggestions for destigmatizing mental health within the BIPOC community? Would you say that one way is addressing the adults that may not know that they are passing down trauma to their children? Is there anyone that would like to start?
Well, one of the first things I teach people with trauma is, again, the neurobiology of it. So when we understand that trauma actually changes your DNA. So after we experience a traumatic event, our amygdala and our hippocampus actually writes that trauma into our DNA. And that trauma gets passed on to descendants. A great example, if on this call right now we do a hands, how many people are afraid of rats? How many people are afraid of insects, snakes, fire, heights, drowning? How many people have actually fallen off a cliff? The reason why we have these fears is our ancestors had to be afraid of these things, and it's written into our DNA now. When we experience trauma, it gets written into our DNA, and anything that resembles that trauma will cause us to react as if that trauma is happening in real time. I can't sit with my back to a door. And I remember a time when my wife and I and my children, we went to like Five Guys in Randolph. And I'll never forget it because there's a door, and by the door, it's a hallway that's glass, and you can see people coming in. And I have my back to the door because I thought that I was good. I was like, I'm good. I could do this. And as the door chimed, every time someone entered that building, I just kept looking, and I had to see it. And my wife was like, you need to stop. You're making people nervous. I was like, I can't stop because I'm nervous. My DNA was hardwired to spot danger. And anything that resembled danger caused me to react as if the danger was still there. I remember as a teen, me and my friend, he grew up on Humboldt. I grew up on Washington, Columbia, late 80s, early 90s. And we're in Newberry Street. Newberry Street is like the safest street in the world. And we're walking, we hear running behind us, and both of us turned around ready to start throwing punches. And when we looked, it was just a little kid and his sister, and they were running and playing. And we both looked at each other and just started laughing because we're like, yo, we thought we were getting run up on. Because why else would people be running up behind you in a public place unless it was to get you? So the trauma inside us are written into our DNA, and it changes our physiology. When people start really understanding this, they start going away from notions of shame, of weakness, of worth, and then they could start seeing what are the expected behaviors from this trauma, and then what are the interventions that you could do that will address these neurobiological phenomena that's going on. So people can be taught this, and communities can be taught this, and we could teach each other and share and work together.
Thank you so much for that response, Dr. Booth. We have a request for a comment, some thoughts on some potential research. So we have a first-year doctoral student, and this individual is going to be designing a study around working with middle schoolers. The hypothesis they are considering is social policies that incorporate Afrocentric perspectives and culturally relevant practices will result in significantly improved brain health indicators and behavioral outcomes among African American middle schoolers compared to traditional policy approaches. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
So the first thing I would say is that the research question? Because that's a really, really long, big question for all of us who have gone through this process. We want to take that down a little bit, right? To be a little more specific as to what you're trying to discover or try to research. And credit to you, because middle school is one of the toughest places for any child, black, blue, pink, or purple. It's hard to go through middle school, but I really think it's a very difficult research question to unpack. So I think my big comment on this would be, how do you narrow this down, right? How do you just kind of figure out what the perspectives are when it relates to culturally relative or practices or relevant practices? Because what are we teaching in middle school, or first, what are we teaching in elementary school level that transcend into middle school, right? And then you look at who is teaching what, and all the educators, and I mentioned this before, and I will continue to say, it's reasonably impossible to populate any public school with majority Black and brown teachers. It's just not possible. So we have to find a way how to educate the current population of teachers around unconscious biases, around deficit teaching, around how to be culturally relevant and culturally aware of the surrounding of Michael or Bobby or Todd, just trying to make sure that they understand that not because they're coming to school with the do-rags on and maybe even wearing their hoodies, that doesn't mean that they're hooligans, right? They're coming to school to learn, right? And some of these young people are probably are afraid of the people in front of them as the people who are afraid of them, right? Because it's always trying to give a sense of vulnerability to your students so you can connect. You have to find a way to connect with your student, right? So no matter how culturally aware you are, if you're not connecting with that student, it's not going to be effective.
I think I would add, and I agree with Dr. Easy's points. That was a pretty difficult question and also very broad, and your committee, without question, is going to force you to narrow. I would recommend looking at one particular policy versus a broad scale social policy, looking at more than one policy. Because if you're looking at several policies, you'll be in your program much longer than you actually need to be. And it's not going to be a fun experience. So, take a look at one policy and then really flush that out in alignment with the question that you want to ask and you want to answer.
Thank you so much, Dr. Easy and Dr. Morgan. And that would be the last question from the attendees, but I actually have a question. I do work in the world of diversifying education, because we know statistically around 90 to 91% of educators in Massachusetts are white, and the statistics don't match, obviously, the population of students. So do you have any thoughts or ideas around possible approaches to diversifying educators and those leaders in our state and communities?
Dr. Wong, you want to go ahead?
I don't think that there's any one particular magic bullet response to that, but I do think as any district is looking at diversifying, if you will, and more explicitly, predominantly white districts. And so let's call that what it is. If you want to diversify your workforce, you've got to have something that would attract people to want to even be there in the first place. And so, you can offer me money, but if the other support systems aren't in place and I don't feel like I belong in that environment, or I don't have the necessary supports to thrive in that environment, and that my innovations and my energies and my ideas are not being considered or recognized, I'm going to jump ship at the end of that contract year. And so each district has, when you talk about recruiting, you can't have that conversation without talking about retention. So what are the things in place that you have to support a diverse workforce? Do you have affinity groups that exist in the district? Do you have other measures that would be supportive? For example, tuition reimbursement programs, and other measures that would not only attract somebody from a diverse background to the district, but would encourage them to stay as well.
Yeah, I've spent some time thinking about that question or similar variations to that question. And I have so many different analogies and paths that I've discussed with myself, right? About how does this really work and how can it really work? So for one, if you look at, let's say, the Firemen Association or the police system, civil service, you tend to find a lot of sons that are police officers or firefighters, right? And there's something about that, right? I think it's learned behavior and it's been taught and trained really early to go into that field. But then you stop and you think and you say, well, why does so many white women or white male teach in K-12? Like, why is that? What is the drive? What's happening? Is it because if you teach 5 years in economically disadvantaged school system or a low income school system, you get your 5 years of your tuition paid off? Is it because you actually care about the young people, the black and brown majority of them who are going to that school system? Is it because your mom, your grandmom did this and they taught you about retirement system and about 403B or 401k? Like, what is the drive? Is it because you have so much time off during the summer? Is it because it's such a flexible work system where you go from 8 to 2:30 or 3 o'clock, and you have the Thanksgiving, the Christmas, and the holiday season, and summer's off? Like, what is the drive, right? So we really have to dress up education, right? We have to entice people to be in education, right? We have to give them a sense of belonging, a sense of worth when they get into education. And I mean, I've seen it. I've seen folks leaving Massachusetts going to North Carolina to recruit Black teachers and spending district money to do so and come back with zero, right? So because even you pour water out of a bucket that has dirt in it and pour fresh water in that bucket, that water is going to be dirty, right? So if you don't clean that vessel to receive and accept Black and brown educators, it doesn't matter. To Dr. Morgan's point, they will leave. The retention is so key in getting people there. And if a teacher of color is going to a district and there are no Black or brown individual in leadership roles in that district, why would I go there? There is no reason for me. I know I'm not going to be supported, right? Because majority of the school board are white male and white women. So where's my support? What's the policies going to be put in place? So you can get more people of color in the school system if the leadership is someone of color.
Thank you so much, both of you, for that response. We actually do have one more question that came in the chat, and this will be our last question. It is directed to Dr. Booth. Given that you stated trauma can be passed down through generations, what specific techniques would you implement to address and heal intergenerational trauma? What role do you think mental health education and awareness among adults play in breaking this cycle for future generations?
I think education is the foundation of that. I think creating spaces where we can have these discussions amongst each other and have practitioners that look like us that have shared experiences. I know firsthand that I've worked at schools, and I remembered where a kid walked up to me one time and he said, "You a real doctor?" I said, "Yeah, why?" He goes, "You don't look like a doctor." I said, well, what does a doctor look like? He goes, and he put his head down and he said, "An old white dude." I said, "Well, it pleases me to be a young looking Black dude showing you what you could do." And I'd have meetings with parents and they'd look at me and I'm like, "What's up, mama?" And they're like, "What?" I'm like, "How you doing?" And they're like, "You talk regular." It wasn't this ivory tower, "Hello, madam. I'm Dr. Boo, and today we would like to discuss the behavioral manifestations of your son and these unseemly characteristics that meet the diagnosis 7.3.40, which is this in the DSM-4. It's how you doing. I used to do home visits, and I remember this kid had anger problems, aggression problems, and he'd fight everywhere, everything. And I was doing a home visit, and it was in a subsidized housing community, aka the projects. And as I'm going, and they know I'm coming, the mother is out the window cussing out some woman like, "Yo, and if I see you, I'm gonna come out there and drag you." Whoop, 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 whoop. And because the relationship I had with mom, I said, "Mom." She's like, "Yes." I was like, "So your son's always fighting people?" She's like, "Yeah." I was like, "What are you doing right now?" She's like, "Nah, but that." I said, "See, there it is. We can't ask our children to change their behaviors if we don't change our behaviors. And I say to parents all the time, do you know that research shows that if you want a child to change their behavior, you don't work with the child as much as you work with the parents. So when you start explaining to people, again, not just the parent, their importance in their child's education, but their importance in their child's mental health and learning new behaviors. I said, we need to rebuild this family. They're like, what do you mean? I was like, do y'all eat together? They're like, nah. I said, well, starting tomorrow, you're going to eat together. You're going to cook together. You're going to teach your son how to cook. They're like, I don't got the patience for that. I was like, good, then he's going to teach you patience. And you start talking about how trauma gets passed on, and we have to start practicing new behaviors to fill that void. You know, when we replace a behavior, we have to replace it with something that works. If someone was fighting all the time and you tell them to stop fighting, but now they go to school, they're getting punked by everybody, they're going to start fighting again. So you have to teach them ways to still go to school, not get punked, but not fight everybody. You talk to parents about relearning the rules of society. A lot of things I talk about are the behaviors that you learn and use that work in one situation. When they don't work in another situation, you have to switch and change. And you start talking about, again, this is biology. And the things we do are re-hardwiring our brains. The experiences we have are re-hardwiring. And then you teach tangible skills, because it's not just talk. You could talk to someone till they're blue in the face, but until you show them something different, when you show them that this works. Like, I walked a parent through how to talk to the principal to find out how to get their child's work requirements beforehand. And she'd been trying to get a syllabus of what her child is supposed to do every day for the longest time, and she'd wild out. And I said, no, here's how you talk. And we practiced it. We role played it. And then when she did it, it worked. And now she had faith that this could work, and then had faith in different behaviors. So it's a very complex thing that requires work, teaching, patience, and really meeting people where they're at and speaking it in a language that they could understand and digest. Because sometimes, especially in my profession, when people speak, it is usually from this really technical, clinical standpoint, and it's bringing it down so people could understand. Great example is ADHD. I tell people all the time. They go, man, my son ain't got no ADHD. He can play video games all day. And I go, well, ADHD doesn't mean that you can't pay attention. It means that the regulatory part of your brain, the brakes of your brain, is not working as fast. So when you have your impulses, it's going so fast that the part of the brain that was supposed to stop it and slow it down can't catch up to it. I was like, so a video game is highly stimulating with rapidly shifting stimuli. So it's loud one moment, really quiet one moment. It has a lot of mini activities that you have to do. So you have to continuously shift focus, and that's what keeps their attention. ADHD doesn't mean you can't pay attention. It means it's very, 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 very hard to pay attention when you're bored. And you teach people that. And then people are then able to start seeing how interventions can change behaviors and patterns, and you help.
You know, Dr. Booth, you raise a wondering. I guess I'm throwing this wondering out on the table to you and Dr. Easy, because and the wondering is, should parent training, i.e., teaching parents how to be parents, be a part of the family engagement strategy? And I share that because as I look at trends of parents of color, if you will, age-wise, they're a lot younger today than they were 10, 15 years ago. And in fact, their youth is closer in age to their kids in elementary and middle school than it is to adults 10 to 15 years ago. And so is it necessary to teach, or should that be a part of a family engagement strategy, to teach parents how to actually be parents? Or is that more of a community responsibility?
I wholeheartedly, I was a part of a research study, and we did cognitive behavioral parenting training classes for parents that had kids with behavioral difficulties or anxiety or depression. And it was some of the hardest work I've ever done because people did not believe it, right? So the first question I used to get asked was, well, you got any kids? And I go, no, when I didn't have kids. And they were like, then how can you teach me how to parent if you don't have any kids? I was like, well, how are you a parent when you didn't have any kids? I was like, you had no prior qualifications that made you able to parent other than you had working overman and gonads. I was like, you learned to parent the way your parents parented. And if you learn dysfunctional methods of parenting, you're going to either A, replicate them, or B, go so far from them that you're permissive. I was like, I'm basing this off evidence. Research shows that there's a specific type of parenting style that works the best. These are the practices. And then I would talk about the benefits of it. And one of the things I had parents do, I would go, I would like for you to set aside 10 minutes with your child every day when they come home. And I would like for you to just do a running commentary on what they're doing. And they're like, what do you mean? I was like, sit down with your child, ask them to do an activity they like. And let's say they're drawing, and all you're going to do is running commentary. So if your child has a pencil, you're going to go, oh, wow, you have a red pencil. You're drawing a circle. You've completed the circle. You're drawing another circle. That's the eyes. You're drawing another circle. Now you've drawn a smile. And you're going to do that for 5 to 10 minutes a day. They're like, why am I going to do that? That feels stupid. I was like, well, what you're doing is you're showing your child that you're going to be listening and watching them without judgment, and you will accept them for who they are. When they come home, it says, I'm setting aside time that is yours and mine together, irrespective of what happened in school. Parents had such hard time doing this. We started talking about behavioral redirecting problems and difficulties. I talked to parents about when they were having newborns. I said, please don't have your child watch any type of screen from prenatal to 2. And they're like, why? I was like, it's Sesame Street. I was like, right. But the human body is being genetically hardwired to live in a specific environment from prenatal to 2. So if you have your child watching a television screen from prenatal to 2, their body is being hardwired to believe that that is normal. So commercials, loud, hyper attention seeking, these things that will drain a lot of the brain's ability to focus, that's what their physiology is going to be hardwired to think is normal. So now when you have them in a class where they just have to sit there, that is almost unbearable for their physiology to tolerate. But teaching people how to talk to children, how to correct behaviors, how to manage behaviors, how to do things to get the child to be conditioned to listen to you. I would tell them, I'd say, when you're watching TV with the child, take the remote control and put it right in front of the child, and then ask them to pass it to you. And when they do, say thank you. I want you to put a glass beside them. And when they're doing something, ask them to kindly pass the glass to you. They're like, why? I could get it myself. I was like, you're right. But you're slowly conditioning them to listen to you and to attend to your needs. And by literally putting this involved in the school system and teaching parents their value and the skills necessary, it would be instrumental. A lot of us are traumatized and come from communities of that. And by teaching parenting skills foundationally could profoundly change how we interact with our kids and their level of success in school.
So I'm going to bring it back into a closing question. And I'm going to ask each one of you, and it's going to be loaded as the first one, but it's going to bring back to the article. And looking forward in all of your positions now, and maybe even in 5 years, if you're looking at a new role, what is the one most critical change we need to make in schools to ensure Black boys are not being over policed? And I'm not really talking about law enforcement at this time. We have addressed school committees. We have addressed not enough Black men in the system, the navigation in these schools being predominantly white schools. And what, from your perspective, what is that critical change? And what is the actionable commitment you are willing to make to really bridge between the schools, mental health services, and the community to support these, Black and brown boys as they navigate, and to really reduce that over policing so they can thrive? And I'll start with Dr. Morgan, Dr. Easy, and then you can close out Dr. Booth.
So I think in terms of changing the narrative, which I think is the first part of the question, in terms of building a better narrative, it starts with us as adults. We have to change the way that we talk if we expect the narrative to begin to change. And I think that changing the narrative, when done effectively, can help, put further dents into the system. I think building a better narrative also involves understanding what the community is saying. So while Black and Brown students' educational attainment is often the topic of various policy initiatives, the voices within the community are often not incorporated in a meaningful way. I think a third component is, in terms of building a better narrative, involves promoting the urgency of now, if you will. So while reforming education is complex, we should act swiftly to change the narrative in Black and Brown education. Kids are impressionable, consistently hearing negative messages about their educational trajectories, and this certainly has a detrimental influence on their self-efficacy and their beliefs about education collectively. I think the concluding part of the question, is one action or commitment that is made, perhaps for me to be a better advocate in investing in high quality early childhood education programs, because those programs can really make a substantial difference in bridging the learning gap. Access to preschool programs has been shown to really improve school readiness and long-term educational outcomes for children, especially those from disadvantaged backgrounds. So if we're talking about how to change the margins, if you will, it starts at a very young age and not, at the tail end of elementary school and middle and high school.
Yeah, I think that is an absolute complex question, because I think the various ways one could approach this. I go back to Dr. Morgan's comment in the opening question. Part of his response was the notion of articulate white Black, right? And how folks see Black folks, Black boys, Black men, Black women, with high level of education, and being able to enunciate, speak with a certain dialect that folks would say, "Oh, wow, that was well said. He was, he's well spoken." Or I think from an early age, allowing our Black boys in school to understand that it's okay to love math. It's okay to speak where folks could understand you, or folks could respond to you in appropriate. It's okay to speak your authenticity, but being able to write a 10-page paper, right? And not worry, and this is probably going to a different conversation. I'm struggling with the notion that we want to allow our Black males, Black students to speak from a place where they're comfortable and just gonna speak, one would say broken English, for example. I'm struggling with this notion that seemed to be taking seed in education, because if you can speak the way we want our Black and Brown students to speak, and yet write a 10-page paper and form proper sentence structure to the point where the four of us on the screen can write dissertations and defend them, right? Then sure, let them speak that way. So I'm struggling with this, because I think we are creating this crutch. We are creating this deficit that's going to be difficult for Black and Brown students to elevate themselves from. So for me, it's really giving them the space, the bandwidth to be proud of who they are in themselves, whether they're genius of math early, they don't have to play basketball or football. They can love math. They can be a linguist. It doesn't, I think trying to find a way to make them in their own authentic selves, whatever it may be, find comfort, right? So it's not like, well, I don't really want to answer that question because I don't want to be looked at as a dork that sits in the back of it. No, like we it's almost like we're gonna add some flair to what we do, right? And Dr. Booth, like you are setting the stage for that because you're not sitting up stiff and speaking from the manual of psychology. You're talking as a normal, authentic human being to your clients and to your patients, and they're probably taken back. But whoa, wait, what do you even mean? Like, and what does it look like to be a superintendent? None of us on the screen looks like what they think it should be a superintendent. But we have to get them to understand, yes, we can be, and we are to be, because if we are not setting that standard, that stage, then I think our Black and brown students are doomed. I'm struggling with how we allow them to speak in school, but yet we are expecting them to write a 10-page paper with proper grammar and how it should be presented for it to be graded in college and or for it to be a dissertation. So I have some thoughts on that, but I'm struggling with that.
And it's an interesting thing, right? How are we preparing our kids for life beyond the moment that they're in right now, and that longitudinal mind state? And I think when we're talking about the policing of Black children, it goes to a larger social context of policing of all Black anything. But with children in particular, I think of the study where they had observers watch a group of kids playing, and they said, point out the kids that are misbehaving. The funny thing about the study is every teacher pointed out like every kid is misbehaving. So off rip, you're like, wait a minute, they saw all the children as misbehaving. But they paid attention to the Black boys and the Black girls most and saw them as misbehaving the most. When we think of the doll studies in the Plessy versus the Board of Education, and they took two identical dolls and they said, show me the good doll, show me the bad doll. And everyone was like, the bad doll's a Black doll. And the kids were crying because they then said to them, show me the doll that looked like you. And the kids some of the Black kids pointing to the white doll. And they were like, why are you doing that? And they're crying because I don't want to be bad. And it shows the internalization of the messages that society gives us. So we're not only internalizing these messages about how we're supposed to be treated and how we deserve to be treated, but externally other people are seeing us a certain way and putting us into light. They redid that study, I think, 3 years ago. And instead of just asking them, show me the good doll and Black doll, they just put the dolls in a room and had kids play. And they watched them. And what happened is the Black doll was the only doll that was mistreated. The Black doll was the only doll that was abused. Kids would take the Black doll and try and cut its hair. And this was different ethnicities. So all those studies show that what we give attention to and what we pay attention to is what we will see as bad. And when we start looking for bad in others, we will see it. But not only does it change how we view about them, it also changes how they view themselves, and it causes pain and trauma. So we have to start teaching adults how to look at kids differently, because it was shocking that they saw children behaving badly in this study because none of the kids were. All the kids were doing normative behaviors, but yet they were viewed as being deficient or being bad. So where is the understanding of lifespan development? What are children expected to do? What are deviant behaviors? What is the realm of the range of normative behaviors? And if you're seeing that Black kids are already predisposed to bad behavior and you're looking at them, how does that lens impact your choice of how to interact with them and the messages they get? So we have to do massive training. where we train people to look at people differently, to understand what is really normative behaviors, and to address how their presuppositions are going to impact these Black and brown bodies that they see every day, that they judge as deficient, that they judge as less worthy. And sometimes when we've internalized it, we've done it to ourselves. Because I remember a lot of times growing up, people like, "Oh, Rich, you sound like a white boy." And the only thing that saved me was, pardon, but I was born and raised Jamaican and hood. So I wasn't going to allow someone to talk to me that way. And there was repercussions involved that kept people from bothering me. But what if I wasn't raised like that? That would have made me feel less about myself. And now all of a sudden, being smart or doing good or sounding white wouldn't have been a good thing. And my education would have been hindered. And lastly, we need to stop telling kids they're smart. When you tell kids they're smart, research shows they start to believe smartness is this innate trait. So when work gets more harder, more voluminous, more complicated, it creates a sense of anxiety because it makes you feel like you're being less smart. So when people, adults, start thinking smart is the thing, and they see Black kids and they think they're not smart, they treat them differently, and the kids treat them differently. If we start treating people with growth mindset, that working hard and meeting the challenges and supporting each other are the way we get through, even if they thought that a Black kid was deficient and wanted to police him, if they said, well, if that's the case, I have to do something to bolster this and help them, that would change also. Not just how you think, but what you do in relation to what you're thinking. Thank you.
Awesome. So we have now come to the end of the program. It is 9:03 and we had a great conversation. I would like to thank Dr. Richard Booth, Dr. Omar X Easy, and Dr. Andre Morgan for coming to this segment of School Daze 3.0 when they see us. I hope everyone enjoyed this segment. For those who still have questions, I will turn those questions over to all the panelists through email. And if they have answers, I will now, distribute it when I distribute the evaluation to kind of end this program. I hope everyone had a great time and reflecting on the message, and also be better advocates for our Black boys in education so they can thrive in life as well. Thank you for Divine Nine family of coming out. Thank you for all the other attendees coming out. We appreciate it. Everyone, have a nice night. Thank you so much.